Well, the Middle East has been through these kinds of periods of intense regional contests for influence in the past. And probably the most famous and well-documented one was something that the late Malcolm Kerr termed the Arab Cold War. It was the 1950s and the 1960s. It was the struggle of the Pan-Arabist movement headed by Nasser against what he called the reactionaries, the people in Saudi Arabia and Jordan, the monarchs. And it really was a contest played out in the domestic politics of various states. It was a Cold War in the sense that the Egyptian army and the Saudi army didn't fight battles against one another. So I think that what's going on now is very similar structurally to that contest. Although it's not an Arab Cold War, it's a Middle East Cold War, because one of the major players is Iran, a non-Arab state. Turkey is very involved, again, another non-Arab state. And of course, the Israelis, being the most important military power in the region, are always going to have always going to factor in. Well, I think that these weak states are a classic political vacuum, right? In which the local players, the domestic political players who are competing against each other, are looking for outsiders to help them. They're inviting these outsiders in. And these outsiders, they could come in through their own ambitions because they want to expand their influence, support the people who are friendly to them, their clients, try to consolidate more influence in these weaker states. Or they might be drawn into these conflicts for purely defensive reasons, right? I'm not particularly interested in this part of the world, in Syria or Iraq or Yemen, but I'm afraid that my rivals are going to get one up on me unless I'm involved. So for both offensive and defensive motivations, these kind of political vacuums draw in the major regional powers to support various clients. You know, I think of sectarianism as a bottom-up phenomenon here. Many people see it as a top-down one, that the Iranians and the Saudis are basically directing a Shia versus Sunni conflict. That's not the way I see it. I see sectarianism coming from the bottom up. When the state falls apart and can't provide the basic levels of security and stability that one would assume is the job of a state, you're going to look to communities where you feel safe. You're going to look to communities where you will be protected, where your needs are going to be taken care of. Now, in some of these countries, right, these social cleavages tend to be sectarian, right? But that's not the whole story. If you look at, for example, the Kurds in both Iraq and Syria, this is not a sectarian division, it's a nationalist, ethnic division, if you will. But Kurdish identity has been strengthened in both Iraq and Syria with the decline of the power of the state in both of these places. I think that sectarianism is, for a number of historical reasons, the main social cleavage in Lebanon and in Syria and in Iraq. And so that's where the sectarian nature of this conflict comes up. We've also seen sectarianism in play in other areas that were in upheaval in the Arab Spring, like Bahrain. But in other weak states, like Libya or like Yemen, it's not sectarianism. It can be tribalism or regionalism or even ideology that are the cleavages around which society divides when the state falls apart. Right. I think it's really hard for regional powers to deny themselves the possibility of extending their influence in these weak states. You need a level of trust among the big players like Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar even. Not that Qatar's that big, but they play in these games. You need a level of trust that is not there right now. It really is a question of kind of political will to deny yourself and trust that the other guy will deny himself the opportunities to expand influence. The structural elements, that is to say the enormous number of these weak states that where you can extend your influence, pushes these regional powers into a more confrontational stance, a more aggressive stance. given the fact that the long-term solution to these kinds to this structural weakness in the system is for these states to kind of reconsolidate and try to build stronger state apparati that would fend off these external interventions, I don't think there's much the U.S. can do. You know, we're a lot better at state destroying than we are at state building. We proved that in Iraq. And so I don't think that we have much to say on the long term. I mean, I think that in the short term, the United States can encourage a more benign regional environment. I think that a couple of ways one can do that is, you know, pursue the negotiations with Iran on the nuclear issue and try to get a mutually acceptable decision there. If you can take the nuclear issue off the table, it might encourage, and I say might, encourage a less fraught, a less conflictual regional environment. The Saudis might be more willing to engage with the Iranians. But other than that, I think there's not a whole lot on the U.S. agenda that we could do to say, end the fighting in Syria. I mean, short of major military intervention, which might end this round of fighting but produce another round of fighting down the line, I don't see anything immediately that the United States can do. And it's interesting to note that as horrible as the fighting in Syria has been, as horrible as the resurgence of fighting in Iraq, as horrible as the situations of chaos in Libya and Yemen are, kind of fundamental basic American interests in the Middle East haven't been touched yet, right? Oil is still flowing, not from Libya, but oil is still flowing from the Persian Gulf countries. The main American alliance with Israel really hasn't been challenged here. The Israelis don't particularly like what's going on, but they haven't been directly confronted or threatened by anything that's happened as of yet. And thus, in many ways, as horrible as these civil wars are, they haven't really directly affected core American interests in the region.